The heavy wooden doors of Courtroom 3B felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds as I pushed them open. Every single person inside turned to stare at me, and I could feel their eyes burning into my skin. The whispers started immediately, spreading through the packed courtroom like wildfire. My black heels clicked against the shiny floor as I walked down the center aisle. Each step echoed in the quiet room, making me feel like everyone was counting them. I held my leather briefcase in one hand and clutched a thick manila folder against my chest with the other. That folder was everything. It was my shield, my sword, and my salvation all rolled into one. The courtroom was completely full. I had never seen so many people at a divorce hearing before. Thomas sat at the front table with his fancy lawyer, Mr. Wellington. Thomas looked like he was at a business meeting instead of getting divorced. His expensive grey suit was perfectly pressed. His dark hair was styled just right, and he kept checking his gold watch like he had somewhere more important to be. He didn't even look at me when I walked in. Behind Thomas sat the two women who had made my life miserable for the past 2 years. His mother, Patricia, wore her usual black outfit with those pearl earrings she was so proud of. Her grey hair was pulled back so tight it made her face look mean and pinched. She sat up straight like a queen on her throne, looking down at everyone around her. Next to Patricia was Veronica, the woman who had been sleeping with my husband for over a year. She wore a bright red dress that was way too tight and way too fancy for a courtroom. Her blonde hair fell over her shoulders in perfect waves, and she kept flipping it back like she was in a shampoo commercial. She looked like she was at a party instead of watching someone's marriage fall apart. As I walked past their row, I heard Patricia's voice ring out loud and clear. Poor thing, I kept walking, keeping my face calm. Even though my heart was beating so fast I thought everyone could hear it. I had practiced this moment in my head 100 times. I knew they would try to make me feel small and worthless. I was ready for it. Veronica's voice followed right behind Patricia's. Sweet as honey but sharp as a knife. She still thinks she matters. Their laughter bubbled up behind me and other people in the courtroom joined in. Thomas's friends from work, his golf buddies, even some of our old neighbors were there, all chuckling and shaking their heads like they felt sorry for me. They all thought they were watching a sad, broken woman who was about to lose everything to a man who was clearly better than her. I reached my table and set down my briefcase carefully. My lawyer, Mrs. Chen, looked nervous as she organized her papers. Her hands were shaking a little and she kept glancing over at Mr. Wellington like he was a monster. Wellington had a reputation for destroying people in divorce court and Mrs. Chen knew it. "Are you ready for this, Natalie?" Mrs. Chen whispered to me, her voice worried. I placed the thick folder on the table and looked her straight in the eyes. "More ready than they think." Judge Harrison walked into the courtroom and everyone stood up. He was a tall man with silver hair and the kind of eyes that seemed to see right through people. I had heard he had been a judge for 25 years and that he didn't put up with lies or games. "Please be seated," Judge Harrison said in his deep, serious voice. "We are here today for the divorce proceedings of Brooks versus Brooks." Mr. Wellington stood up first, smoothing down his expensive tie. "Your Honor, my client Thomas Brooks is a successful businessman who has worked very hard to build a good life for himself and his wife. Unfortunately, Mrs. Brooks has become increasingly unstable and unreasonable over the past year. She has made wild, untrue accusations against my client and has refused to accept a very fair settlement offer." I could feel more eyes turning toward me, judging me, feeling sorry for me. The whispers got louder. Wellington kept talking, his voice getting stronger. "Mr. Brooks is willing to be generous despite his wife's difficult behavior. He asks only for what is rightfully his contenders, the family business that he built, the house that he worked to pay for, and a reasonable division of their assets." Patricia nodded her head like she was agreeing with everything Wellington said. Veronica examined her bright red fingernails and smiled like she had already won. "Mrs. Brooks has no children to support and has her own small business," Wellington continued, making my architecture firm sound like a little hobby. "She will be perfectly fine with a modest settlement." When he finished talking, the whole courtroom felt heavy with judgment. Everyone seemed to think that Thomas was being more than fair to his crazy, difficult wife. Judge Harrison looked over at Mrs. Chen. "Does Mrs. Brooks wish to respond to these statements?" Mrs. Chen started to stand up, but I touched her arm gently and stood up myself. The courtroom got completely quiet. "Your Honor, I said, keeping my voice steady and clear. I have evidence that I believe will be very important for this case. I picked up my thick folder and walked toward the judge's bench. Every person in that courtroom was staring at me now, but the whispers had stopped completely. Judge Harrison looked curious as I handed him the folder. What type of evidence are we talking about, Mrs. Brooks? Financial records, photographs, text messages, witness statements, and documentation of my husband's business activities, I said simply. Thomas shifted in his seat for the first time since I had walked in. Mr. Wellington frowned and started to say something, but Judge Harrison held up his hand to stop him. I'll review these documents now, the judge said, opening my folder. I walked back to my seat and sat down quietly. Behind me I could hear Patricia whispering urgently to someone. Veronica had stopped looking at her nails and was staring at me with a confused expression on her face. Judge Harrison read through my papers slowly and carefully. His eyebrows went up several times, and I saw him flip back to reread certain pages. The silence in the courtroom grew thicker and heavier with each minute that passed. Finally, Judge Harrison looked up from the folder. His whole expression had changed completely. Before he had looked neutral and maybe a little bored. Now his eyes were sharp and focused, like a hawk that had just spotted its prey. A small, strange smile appeared at the corners of his mouth. He looked directly at Thomas, then at Patricia and Veronica, and finally at me. "Oh, she does," Judge Harrison said quietly, but his voice carried clearly through the silent courtroom. The laughter that had followed me into the courtroom died instantly. Patricia's mouth fell open like a fish. Veronica's confident smile disappeared completely. Thomas went white as a sheet and grabbed his lawyer's arm. I sat perfectly still with my hands folded in my lap. Inside, I felt warm satisfaction spreading through my whole body, but I kept it hidden. This was just the beginning, and I had waited too long for this moment to let my emotions show. Now the real show was about to start. 2 years earlier, my life looked like something from a magazine. Thomas and I lived in a beautiful 3-story house that I had designed myself from the ground up. Every room was perfect, from the marble kitchen counters to the huge windows that let sunlight pour into our living room. I was so proud of that house. It represented everything I had worked for as an architect. Thomas seemed like the perfect husband back then. Every morning he would kiss me goodbye before leaving for work in his sharp business suits. He always smelled like expensive cologne and confidence. In the evenings he would come home with flowers or small gifts, telling me how much he loved me and how lucky he was to have such a talented wife. "You're amazing, Natalie," he would say, wrapping his arms around me while I cooked dinner. "I don't know what I did to deserve you." Those words made me feel like I was floating on air. After growing up poor and working my way through college, having someone like Thomas love me felt like a fairy tale come true. We went to fancy restaurants every weekend, and Thomas would hold my hand across the table while telling me about his business deals. He owned a construction company that seemed to be doing really well. He always had stories about new contracts and important clients. I felt so proud walking beside him at company parties, watching other women look at him with envy. But there was one dark cloud in our perfect life: Patricia, Thomas's mother. Patricia visited our house at least 3 times a week, always without calling first. She would walk through our front door like she owned the place, her sharp eyes scanning everything for problems. Nothing I did was ever good enough for her. "The living room looks cluttered, dear," she would say, moving my carefully chosen decorations to different spots. "And this dinner smells a bit too spicy. Thomas has a sensitive stomach, you know." I would smile and nod, trying to keep the peace. "I'll remember that next time, Patricia. It's Mrs. Brooks to you," she would correct me coldly. "We're not that close yet." Even after 5 years of marriage, she still said, yet like I was on probation. Patricia criticized everything from my cooking to my clothes to the way I arranged the furniture. She would run her finger along surfaces looking for dust and make comments about how her cleaning lady did a much better job at her house. When I planted flowers in our garden, she said they were the wrong colors. When I redecorated our bedroom, she said it looked too modern and cold. The worst part was how Thomas reacted to his mother's constant criticism. Instead of defending me, he would just shrug and say, "She means well, Natalie. She's just trying to help." "Help with what?" I asked him one evening after Patricia had spent an hour telling me everything wrong with the dinner I had spent all day preparing. "She wants us to be happy," Thomas said, not looking up from his phone. She raised me by herself after my father died. She just wants to make sure I'm taken care of. But I take care of you, I said, feeling hurt and confused. I know you do, baby, Thomas said, finally looking at me. Just try to be patient with her, okay? She'll come around eventually. But Patricia never came around. If anything, she got worse as time went on. She started showing up when Thomas wasn't home, walking through the house and making lists of things that needed to be fixed. She would move my personal items around and then act innocent when I asked about it. I was just tidying up, she would say with a sweet smile that never reached her eyes. This house is so big, it must be hard for you to keep track of everything. I started to notice small changes in Thomas around this time. He began working later and later, sometimes not coming home until after 10 at night. When I asked about his long hours, he would get irritated. Business is really picking up, he would say, loosening his tie with sharp, angry movements. I thought you'd be happy that we're making more money. I am happy, I would say quickly. I just miss spending time with you. We spend plenty of time together, he would reply, but his voice sounded distant and cold. Thomas also became more secretive with his phone. He used to leave it lying around the house, but suddenly he was taking it with him everywhere, even to the bathroom. When it rang during dinner, he would grab it quickly and step outside to answer. Work call. He would explain when he came back, but he never told me what the calls were about anymore. I started finding small things that didn't make sense. Receipts in his jacket pockets for expensive jewelry that I never received. Restaurant bills for 2 people on nights when he said he was working alone. Credit card charges for hotels in our own city when he claimed to be at the office. When I asked Thomas about these things, he would get angry and defensive. Are you spying on me now? He would shout, his face turning red. I can't believe you don't trust me after everything I've done for you. I'm not spying, I would say, my voice shaking. I just found these receipts and I was confused. Those are business expenses, he would say, snatching the papers from my hands. I take clients out for dinner and buy gifts for important people. That's how business works, Natalie. Maybe if you understood anything about the real world, you wouldn't be so paranoid. His words strung like slaps. I had built my own successful architecture business from nothing, but Thomas made me feel like I was stupid and naive. Patricia always seemed to show up right after our fights, like she had some kind of radar for trouble. She would pat Thomas on the shoulder and give me disapproving looks. Successful men need understanding wives. She would tell me while Thomas was in the shower, if you keep questioning him and making him feel bad, you'll push him away. I started keeping a small journal where I wrote down the strange things that happened and the lies Thomas told. I didn't know why I was doing it at the time. It just felt important to remember everything clearly, especially when Thomas and Patricia made me feel like I was going crazy. Looking back now, I realized that journal would become the foundation of everything that happened in that courtroom. But back then, I was just a confused wife trying to save her marriage, and wondering why the perfect life I had built was slowly crumbling around me. The first time I really knew something was seriously wrong was on a Tuesday night in March. Thomas had told me he was working late on a big contract proposal. Something about a new shopping centre that could make or break his company. I had made his favourite dinner, grilled salmon with lemon butter sauce, and kept it warm in the oven until almost 10:00. When he finally came home, his shirt was wrinkled and he smelled like perfume, not my perfume, something flowery and sweet that made my stomach turn. Sorry I'm so late, he said, barely looking at me as he loosened his tie. The meeting ran forever. What meeting? I asked, trying to keep my voice light. I thought you were working on the proposal. Thomas stopped moving for just a second, then continued walking toward the stairs, the meeting about the proposal with the investors on a Tuesday night. Business doesn't stop at 5:00, Natalie, he snapped. Some of us have real responsibilities. I followed him upstairs, my heart pounding. I saved you dinner. Are you hungry? I already ate, he said, not turning around. We ordered food during the meeting, but I had found the receipt in his jacket pocket the next morning. Dinner for 2 at Romano's, the fancy Italian restaurant downtown, the same restaurant where Thomas had proposed to me 6 years earlier. The bill showed 2 glasses of wine, 2 in tray, and 1 piece of chocolate cake with 2 forks. When I asked him about it, Thomas exploded. Are you going through my pockets now? He yelled, his face turning bright red. What's next, Natalie? Are you going to follow me to work, hide in my office? I was just taking your jacket to the dry cleaner, I said, my hands shaking as I held the receipt. I always check the pockets first. That dinner was with a client, Thomas said, grabbing the paper from me and tearing it up. Her name is Mrs. Patterson and she's thinking about hiring us for a big project. I had to wine and dine her to get the contract. Mrs. Patterson ordered chocolate cake. She has a sweet tooth, Thomas said coldly. Is that a crime? I wanted to believe him. I tried so hard to believe him. But the lies kept piling up like snow in a blizzard, getting deeper and deeper until I couldn't see the truth anymore. A few weeks later, I decided to surprise Thomas at his office. It was our wedding anniversary, and I had bought him a new watch that I wanted to give him in person. I also thought maybe we could go to lunch together, just the two of us, like we used to do when we were dating. I drove to his office building downtown and parked in the visitor's spot. The security guard at the front desk knew me from previous visits. Hi, Mrs. Brooks, he said with a friendly smile. Here to see your husband. Yes, is he in? The guard looked confused. Mr. Brooks left about 3 hours ago around noon. He was with a young lady, blonde hair, real pretty. They seemed to be in a hurry. My heart dropped into my stomach. Are you sure? Oh yes, ma'am. I've been working this desk for 10 years. I know all the regular folks. Your husband definitely left with that lady. I drove home in a daze, the wrapped watch sitting on the passenger seat like a joke. When Thomas came home that evening, I asked him about his day. Busy as usual, he said, not meeting my eyes. Meetings all afternoon. I barely had time for lunch. Where did you have lunch? At my desk, sandwich from the deli downstairs. Another lie. I wrote it down in my journal that night along with the security guard's name and the time Thomas had actually left his office. The lies became more frequent and more obvious. Thomas would say he was going to the gym, but come home without his gym bag. He would claim to be at business dinners, but the restaurants he mentioned would be closed on the nights he said he went there. He started getting phone calls at all hours, stepping outside or into another room to answer them. Keeps calling you so late? I asked one night when his phone rang at 11:30. Work emergency, he said, already walking toward the kitchen. You know how it is. But I could hear him laughing softly while he talked, the way he used to laugh with me when we were first dating. When he came back to bed 20 minutes later, he was smiling in a way that made my chest ache. Patricia's visits became more frequent during this time, and her comments became sharper and more hurtful. You look tired, dear, she would say, studying my face like she was looking for cracks in a wall. Are you sleeping well? Thomas mentioned you've been having trouble. I'm sleeping fine, I would lie. Patricia would hum like she didn't believe me. Well, stress can really age a woman. You should try that new face cream I told you about, the expensive one. She started making comments about my weight, my hair, my clothes. Nothing was ever direct enough to call her out on, but every word was designed to make me feel smaller and less worthy. Thomas works so hard, she would sigh while rearranging my kitchen cabinets. He deserves a wife who takes better care of herself. Men notice these things, you know. The worst part was that Thomas never defended me anymore. When his mother made her cutting remarks, he would just nod along or change the subject. Sometimes I caught him looking at me with the same critical expression his mother wore, like he was seeing all my flaws for the first time. I started avoiding mirrors and wearing looser clothes. I stopped styling my hair the way I used to and rarely wore makeup unless I had to meet with clients. I felt like I was disappearing, becoming invisible in my own life. But I kept writing everything down in my journal. Every lie, every strange phone call, every cruel comment from Patricia. I didn't know why it felt so important to document everything, but something deep inside me whispered that I would need these details someday. That whisper turned out to be the smartest thing I ever listened to. The night my world completely shattered was a Thursday in late September. Thomas had gone to bed early, claiming he had a headache from a stressful day at work. I stayed up late working on blueprints for a new client, a small office building that needed to be finished by the end of the month. Around midnight, I went to the kitchen to get some water and noticed Thomas had left his laptop open on the counter. The screen was still glowing, showing his email inbox. I wasn't planning to snoop, but as I walked past, a name caught my eye. Veronica Lane. My heart started beating faster. I knew that name. Veronica was the real estate agent who had helped us buy our house 5 years ago. She was young, blonde, and had flirted with Thomas the entire time we were house hunting. I remembered feeling uncomfortable with how she would touch his arm and laughed too loudly at his jokes. I looked toward the stairs to make sure Thomas was still asleep, then clicked on the email. What I saw made my knees go weak. Can't wait to see you tomorrow, baby. Same hotel as last time. I'll wear that red dress you love so much. XOXOV. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through more emails. There were dozens of them going back over a year. Love letters, plans for secret meetings, photos of them together at expensive restaurants and hotels. In one picture, Veronica was wearing a diamond necklace that I recognized from a receipt I had found in Thomas's pocket months earlier. The emails revealed everything. They had been meeting twice a week for over a year. Thomas had been telling her he was going to leave me soon, that he was just waiting for the right time. Veronica wrote about how much she hated having to pretend to be nice to me when we ran into each other around town. I can't stand the way she looks at you like she owns you, one email said. Soon, everyone will know you're mine. But the worst discovery was yet to come. I found a folder on his laptop labeled financial planning. Inside were bank statements for accounts I had never seen before. Thomas had been secretly moving our money. Money from my business, money from our joint savings, money from investments I thought we owned together into accounts that only had his name on them. He had stolen almost $200,000 from me. I printed everything, every email, every bank statement, every photo. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely operate the printer, but I managed to get copies of everything before closing the laptop and putting it back exactly where Thomas had left it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my home office reading through the emails over and over again, trying to understand how my husband had become a stranger. The man who brought me flowers and told me he loved me was the same man who wrote passionate love letters to another woman and called me boring and clingy in his messages to her. The next morning, Thomas came downstairs whistling and kissed my cheek like nothing had happened. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, pouring himself coffee. "Sleep well." I stared at him, this man I had shared a bed with for 8 years, and realized I didn't know him at all. "Thomas," I said quietly, "we need to talk." Something in my voice must have warned him because his whole body went stiff. "About what?" I pulled out the printed emails and placed them on the kitchen table. "About Veronica Lane." Thomas's face went completely white, then bright red. For a moment he just stared at the papers like they might disappear if he looked hard enough. "Where did you get these?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your laptop, you left it open." Thomas was quiet for a long time. Then instead of apologizing or trying to explain, he did something that shocked me. He laughed. "Well," he said, sitting down across from me like we were discussing the weather. "I guess the cat's out of the bag, that's all you have to say." Thomas shrugged, and in that moment I saw who he really was. The mask he had been wearing for years finally slipped away completely. "What do you want me to say, Natalie? That I'm sorry, that it didn't mean anything?" He leaned back in his chair, looking almost relieved. "The truth is, Veronica makes me happy. She's exciting and fun, and she doesn't spend all day questioning everything I do." "I trusted you," I whispered. "And I got bored," Thomas said coldly. "You want to know the truth? You've become exactly like my mother said you would. Needy, suspicious, always complaining about something." "Veronica appreciates me. What about the money? What about stealing from my business?" Thomas's eyes hardened. "I didn't steal anything. I moved our money to safer accounts. Money that I helped you earn, by the way. If it wasn't for my connections and my support, your little architecture business would have failed years ago." Before I could respond, I heard the front door open. Patricia's voice called out from the hallway. "Thomas, are you home, dear?" She walked into the kitchen and immediately saw the tension between us. Her eyes fell on the printed emails scattered across the table, and a small smile appeared on her lips. "Oh," she said, not sounding surprised at all. "I see you finally found out. You knew?" I asked, staring at her in disbelief. Patricia sat down next to her son and patted his hand. "Of course I knew. Thomas tells me everything. Veronica is a lovely girl, much more suitable for him than—" She looked at me with disgust. "Well, then someone who drives him away with constant nagging and suspicion. I drove him away. Men like Thomas need women who build them up, not tear them down," Patricia said matter-of-factly. "You've been making him miserable for years. At least Veronica makes him smile." I looked back and forth between them, these two people who had been lying to my face for over a year. They sat there calmly, like I was the problem, like I was the one who had done something wrong. "I want to divorce," I said. Thomas nodded. Good, Veronica and I are tired of sneaking around anyway. You'll get what's fair, Patricia added. Nothing more. They both looked so confident, so sure that they held all the power. They had no idea that I had been documenting everything for months. They didn't know about the journal, the receipts, the witness statements I was already planning to collect. As I walked out of that kitchen, leaving them to celebrate their victory, I made myself a promise. They thought they had destroyed me, but they had actually just made me stronger, and I was going to make sure they regretted every lie they had ever told. The morning after I confronted Thomas, I sat in my car outside a small detective agency downtown, staring at the business card I had found online. Rodriguez Investigations. The review said Detective Carlos Rodriguez was thorough, honest, and specialized in cases involving cheating spouses and financial fraud. My hands were shaking as I walked into the small office. Detective Rodriguez was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and graying hair. He looked like someone's father, which made me feel a little safer. "Mrs. Brooks," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Tell me what's going on." I spread out all the emails and bank statements on his desk. "My husband has been cheating on me and stealing our money. I need to know everything he's been doing." Detective Rodriguez studied the papers carefully, his expression growing more serious with each page. "This is a good start, but we'll need much more if you want to protect yourself in divorce court. How long do you think this has been going on?" "At least a year, maybe longer." "And you said he's been moving money around?" I nodded. "Almost $200,000 that I know of, but there might be more." Detective Rodriguez leaned back in his chair. "Mrs. Brooks, I have to ask, are you prepared for what we might find? Sometimes the truth is worse than people expect." "I need to know everything," I said firmly, "no matter how bad it is." Over the next 3 months, Detective Rodriguez became my secret weapon. He followed Thomas and Veronica, took photographs of their meetings, and dug deep into Thomas' business dealings. What he discovered was so much worse than I had imagined. Thomas hadn't just been cheating with Veronica. Detective Rodriguez found evidence of at least 3 other affairs over the past 5 years. There was Jennifer, a secretary at his office who he had been seeing 2 years ago. There was Michelle, a client who owned a restaurant chain. And there was Amanda, a woman he met at his gym who thought he was single. "Your husband has a pattern," Detective Rodriguez explained during one of our weekly meetings. "He tells each woman what she wants to hear. He promised Jennifer he would leave you for her, then dropped her when he got bored. He told Michelle his marriage was just for business purposes. He's been lying to everyone, but the financial fraud was even worse than the cheating." Detective Rodriguez discovered that Thomas had been lying about his business success for years. His construction company was actually failing, losing money on almost every project because of Thomas' poor decisions and gambling habits. "He's been gambling?" I asked, feeling sick to my stomach. "Big time. Poker games, sports betting, even some casino trips to Atlantic City. He owes money to some very dangerous people." Detective Rodriguez showed me bank records that proved Thomas had been using money from my architecture business to pay his gambling debts. He had also been lying on his tax returns, hiding income and claiming fake business expenses. "This isn't just cheating and divorce stuff anymore," Detective Rodriguez said. "Seriously, this is criminal fraud, tax evasion. Your husband could go to prison for this." We gathered witness statements from people who had seen Thomas with his various girlfriends, the security guard from his office building, waitresses from restaurants where he took his mistresses, hotel clerks who remembered him checking in with different women. Everyone remembered Thomas because he was loud and flashy, always trying to impress people with his money and charm. Detective Rodriguez also discovered something that made my blood boil. Thomas had been telling people, including his business partners and some of our mutual friends, that I was mentally unstable. He claimed I was paranoid, jealous, and possibly having a nervous breakdown. "He's been setting up a narrative," Detective Rodriguez explained, "making people think you're crazy so that when the divorce happens, everyone will believe his side of the story." Patricia had been helping him spread these lies. She had been telling people at her country club that I was difficult and unstable, that Thomas was suffering because of my mental problems. She even suggested to some people that Thomas might need to have me committed to a mental hospital. "They've been planning this for a long time. I realized it looks that way. But here's the thing. They got sloppy. They left a paper trail and they underestimated you." Detective Rodriguez helped me gather financial records that showed exactly how much money Thomas had stolen and where he had hidden it. We found accounts in other states, investments made with my money that only had his name on them, and even a secret credit card that he had been using to pay for his affairs. We also discovered that Veronica wasn't as innocent as she pretended to be. She knew Thomas was married and had been helping him hide money. In some of their emails, she talked about how they would split our money once the divorce was final. She thought she was going to get half of everything Thomas stole from me. The most shocking discovery came in month 3 of the investigation. Detective Rodriguez found out that Thomas had been stealing money from his business partners too. He had been taking money from joint accounts and using it for personal expenses. His partners had no idea they were being robbed. "This changes everything," Detective Rodriguez said when he showed me the evidence. "When his business partners find out about this, they're going to want their money back and they're going to be very angry." By the time we finished our investigation, I had a folder 3 and thick filled with evidence. Bank records, photographs, witness statements, copies of emails and text messages, tax documents, and proof of criminal activity that went back years. "This is enough to destroy him," Detective Rodriguez said as we organized everything for my lawyer. "But are you sure you want to go this far? Once we present this evidence, there's no going back. Thomas's life as he knows it will be over." I thought about all the nights I had cried myself to sleep, wondering what I had done wrong. I thought about Patricia's cruel comments and Veronica's smug smile. I thought about how they had all laughed at me, thinking I was too weak and stupid to fight back. "I'm sure," I said, "they made their choices. Now they have to live with the consequences." Detective Rodriguez smiled and shook my hand. "Then let's give them exactly what they deserve." The divorce proceedings began on a cold Monday morning in January. I had barely slept the night before, going over my evidence one more time with Mrs. Chen. She seemed more confident now that we had Detective Rodriguez's investigation, but I could tell she was still nervous about facing Mr. Wellington in court. "Remember," she told me as we walked into the courthouse, "let them talk first. Let them dig their own grave with lies. Then we'll bury them with the truth." The courtroom was even more packed than I had expected. Thomas had clearly invited everyone he knew to watch what he thought would be my public humiliation. His business partners sat in the front rows along with his golf buddies and several neighbors from our street. They all looked at me with pity and whispered among themselves about poor Thomas having to deal with his crazy wife. Thomas sat at his table wearing his most expensive suit, the navy blue one I had bought him for his birthday 2 years ago. He looked calm and confident, occasionally turning to smile at his supporters in the audience. Mr. Wellington had a stack of papers in front of him and kept checking his gold watch like this whole thing was beneath him. Patricia sat directly behind Thomas, dressed in her finest black dress with her pearl necklace gleaming under the courtroom lights. She had done her hair specially for the occasion and wore more makeup than usual. She looked like she was attending a celebration rather than her son's divorce hearing. Next to Patricia sat Veronica, and seeing her there made my stomach turn. She wore a tight red dress that was completely inappropriate for a courtroom, but she didn't care. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, and she kept touching Thomas's shoulder and whispering in his ear. She looked like she owned him already. When Judge Harrison called the court to order, Mr. Wellington stood up immediately. He was clearly eager to get started with what he thought would be an easy victory. "Your Honor," Wellington began in his smooth, practiced voice, "this is a straightforward case of a successful businessman trying to escape an increasingly unstable marriage. My client, Thomas Brooks, has worked tirelessly to build a thriving construction business and provide a comfortable life for his wife." He gestured toward Thomas, who nodded solemnly like he was the victim in all of this. "Unfortunately, Mrs. Brooks has become paranoid, jealous, and emotionally unstable over the past several years. She has made wild accusations against my client, accusing him of infidelity without any proof. She has become obsessed with monitoring his every move, going through his personal belongings, and following him to work." I could hear murmurs of sympathy from the audience. Several people shook their heads sadly like they felt sorry for Thomas having to deal with such a difficult wife. Wellington continued, his voice getting stronger and more dramatic. "Mrs. Brooks has refused every reasonable settlement offer. She seems to believe she is entitled to assets that my client earned through his own hard work and business skills. She has even made threats against my client and his family. Patricia nodded vigorously from her seat, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue like she was the one being hurt by all of this. My client is asking for nothing more than what is rightfully his, Wellington said, spreading his arms wide like he was being completely reasonable. The family business that he built from nothing, the house that he worked to pay for, and a fair division of marital assets. Mrs. Brooks has her own small architectural business and will be perfectly capable of supporting herself. The way he said small architectural business made it sound like I sold crafts at flea markets instead of designing million-dollar buildings. Mr. Brooks has been more than generous, offering his wife a settlement that would allow her to maintain her current lifestyle. But Mrs. Brooks wants more. She wants to punish my client for the crime of being successful while married to someone who cannot handle that success. When Wellington finished, the courtroom buzzed with whispers. I could feel eyes on me, judging me, deciding that I was exactly the kind of greedy, unstable woman Wellington had described. Thomas took the witness stand first, looking handsome and sincere in his expensive suit. He spoke in a calm, reasonable voice about how hard he had worked to build his business and how difficult our marriage had become. I love my wife, he said, looking directly at me with what appeared to be genuine sadness. But she's changed over the years. She's become suspicious and angry about everything. She goes through my phone, my emails, my pockets. She follows me to work and questions every business decision I make. Several people in the audience nodded sympathetically. I've tried to be patient, Thomas continued. I know she's insecure about my success, but I can't live like this anymore. I feel like I'm walking on eggshells in my own home. Patricia took the stand next, playing the role of the concerned mother perfectly. She spoke about how worried she was about me, how I had become increasingly erratic and hostile toward her family. I've tried to help Natalie, Patricia said, her voice trembling with fake emotion. I've offered advice about marriage and tried to be supportive, but she sees enemies everywhere. She's accused Thomas of terrible things without any proof. She's even been rude and threatening toward me. She dabbed at her eyes again, and I saw several women in the audience looking at me with disgust. Then Veronica took the stand, and I had to grip the arms of my chair to keep from standing up and screaming. She spoke in a sweet, innocent voice about how I had harassed her and made threatening phone calls because I was jealous of her friendship with Thomas. Mrs. Brooks seems to think that any woman who talks to her husband is trying to steal him, Veronica said with a sad smile. She called me several times, screaming and accusing me of things that simply aren't true. I felt so sorry for Thomas, having to deal with that kind of behavior at home. The lies flowed out of her mouth like poison, and the audience ate up every word. By the time she finished testifying, I looked like a crazy, jealous wife who was trying to destroy an innocent man and the people who cared about him. Judge Harrison listened to everything with a neutral expression, occasionally taking notes. When the testimony was finished, he looked at Mrs. Chen. Does Mrs. Brooks wish to present any evidence or testimony? Mrs. Chen stood up and I could see her hands shaking slightly. Yes, Your Honor. Mrs. Brooks has substantial evidence that will show the court what really happened in this marriage. That's when I stood up with my thick folder and everything changed. Judge Harrison opened my folder and began reading the first document. The courtroom was completely silent except for the sound of pages turning. I watched his face carefully as his eyes moved across the evidence. Detective Rodriguez and I had spent months gathering. The first thing he saw was a bank statement showing Thomas had moved $47,000 from my business account into a personal account I had never seen before. Judge Harrison's eyebrows went up slightly and he flipped to the next page. Then came the photographs. Thomas and Veronica kissing outside a hotel. Thomas and Jennifer holding hands at a restaurant. Thomas and Michelle laughing together at a bar. Each photo was dated and time-stamped, showing a clear pattern of cheating that went back years. Judge Harrison's expression grew darker as he continued reading. He found the emails between Thomas and Veronica where they talked about splitting our money after the divorce. He saw the tax documents that showed Thomas had been lying to the government about his income. He read the witness statements from hotel clerks, restaurant servers, and Thomas's own employees who had seen him with different women. The courtroom stayed silent, but I could feel the tension building. Thomas kept shifting in his seat, and Mr. Wellington was frantically whispering to him. Patricia had stopped dabbing her eyes and was staring at the judge with growing alarm. After 20 minutes of reading, Judge Harrison looked up. His face was completely different now. The neutral, slightly bored expression was gone, replaced by something cold and angry. "Mr. Wellington," Judge Harrison said in a voice that made everyone in the courtroom sit up straighter, "are you aware that your client has been committing tax fraud for the past 3 years?" Wellington's face went white. "Your Honor, we weren't aware of any." "Are you aware that your client has stolen over $200,000 from his wife's business accounts? Those are joint marital assets. Are you aware that your client owes gambling debts to multiple creditors and has been using stolen money to pay those debts?" The courtroom erupted in whispers. Thomas's business partners were staring at him with shock and anger. I could see them putting pieces together, realizing that Thomas had probably been stealing from them too. Judge Harrison held up his hand for silence. "Mr. Brooks, please stand." Thomas stood up slowly, his confident demeanor completely gone. He looked like a scared little boy who had been caught breaking windows. "Mr. Brooks, you have lied under oath in my courtroom. You have committed fraud, tax evasion, and theft. You have stolen money from your wife, your business partners, and the federal government." Judge Harrison's voice got louder with each word. "You have conducted multiple affairs while lying to this court about your character and your marriage. You have attempted to hide assets and manipulate the legal system." Thomas opened his mouth to speak, but Judge Harrison cut him off. "I am ordering an immediate investigation into your business practices. The IRS will be notified about your tax fraud. Your assets are frozen pending a full audit of your financial activities." The judge turned to look at Patricia and Veronica, who were both sitting frozen in their seats. "Mrs. Patricia Brooks, you have also lied under oath. You knew about your son's affairs and helped him hide his criminal activities. You will be investigated as an accessory to fraud." Patricia's mouth fell open and all the color drained from her face. "Miss Veronica Lane, you have also committed perjury in my courtroom. You knew Mr. Brooks was married and helped him hide stolen money. You will also face criminal charges." Veronica started crying, but they weren't the fake tears she had been using earlier. These were real tears of panic and fear. Judge Harrison turned back to me. "Mrs. Brooks, you will receive the family home, all legitimate marital assets, and full restitution for the money stolen from your business. Mr. Brooks will pay alimony and all court costs." But he wasn't finished yet. "Furthermore, I am recommending that the district attorney file criminal charges against Mr. Brooks for fraud, tax evasion, and theft. He will likely face significant jail time." The courtroom exploded into chaos. Thomas's business partners were shouting questions at him. Patricia was sobbing loudly. Veronica was trying to sneak out of the courtroom, but Detective Rodriguez was already waiting by the door with 2 police officers. Thomas collapsed back into his chair, his head in his hands. All his confidence and arrogance were gone. He looked like exactly what he was, a criminal who had finally been caught. Mr. Wellington was frantically packing up his papers, clearly wanting to distance himself from the disaster his client had become. Judge Harrison banged his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. "This court is adjourned. Mr. Brooks, you are not to leave the state pending further investigation." As people filed out of the courtroom, I sat quietly in my chair, watching the chaos unfold around me. Thomas's friends and supporters were avoiding him now, whispering among themselves about how they had been fooled. His business partners were already on their phones, probably calling their lawyers. Patricia walked past me without looking in my direction, her perfect composure finally shattered. Veronica was being escorted out by the police officers, still crying and protesting her innocence. Thomas finally looked at me as he was leaving the courtroom. For just a moment I saw something that might have been regret in his eyes, but it was too late for regret. He had made his choices and now he had to live with the consequences. Detective Rodriguez appeared at my side as the courtroom emptied. "How do you feel?" he asked. I thought about that question for a moment. I felt tired, relieved, and strangely empty. The anger that had been driving me for months was finally gone, replaced by something that felt like peace. "I feel free," I said finally. Outside the courthouse, reporters were already gathering. Word had spread quickly about the dramatic courtroom revelations. Thomas's construction company would probably be bankrupt within a week once his business partners and creditors learned the truth. As I walked to my car, I thought about the woman I had been 2 years ago. Trusting, naive, always trying to please everyone around me. That woman was gone forever, replaced by someone stronger and smarter. They had all laughed when I walked into that courtroom, thinking I was just another weak wife who would quietly accept whatever scraps they threw at me. But I had the last laugh after all. And unlike theirs, mine was built on truth and justice instead of lies and cruelty. The game was over and I had won.